Well, welcome everyone. As part of session 7, we'll be exploring low-tech passive cooling solutions. Earlier in session 2, we heard from panelists about how to decide which cooling technology is best suited for your context. And don't worry if you missed it, because all recordings will be available after the event. But one key takeaway that we want to build on is this. Depending on the crop type and the final markets where farmers plan to sell, passive cooling, which can even be applied at the household level, has tremendous potential to improve shelf life, increase farmers' incomes, and enhance the quality of food reaching consumers. In this session, we'll bring together practitioners and researchers working on the front lines of passive cooling to share lessons learned from experiments and deploying these technologies in rural communities across West Africa, highlighting how passive cooling can make a tangible difference in food preservation and livelihoods. Without further ado, I'd like to invite the speakers for the session to introduce themselves: Dr. Eric Verploegen, Jörg Schemminger, and Mohamedou Saidou Balde.
Great. Eric, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much. And thanks for the pronunciation of my name. That's better than I can do. Yes, I'm Eric. I'm the founder of CoolVeg, and CoolVeg is a nonprofit organization focused on developing and transferring evaporative cooling technologies for fruit and vegetable storage across Africa and parts of India.
Jörg, maybe you want to go next?
I can go next, yeah. So, hi, my name is Jörg Schemminger, and I've been working with EMPA the last 5 years almost, and I've been involved in the virtual cold chain assistant project at the beginning, and also I had the pleasure last year to go to Guinea-Bissau and test the passive evaporative cooling technologies in the field, together with Mohamedou, which maybe you can now get to do your introduction.
Hi everyone. I'm Mohamedou Saidou Balde. I've been working with BASE and EMPA in this project since the 2024 and coordinating all activities related to your virtual cold chain assistant project here in Guinea-Bissau, but also coordinating the research activity on passive cooling and training as well. Thank you. Great to be here.
Thank you all for the introductions, and thank you everyone who is joining the session. I'm Rebecca Botello. I work as a sustainable finance specialist at BASE Foundation, and I will be your moderator for the session. We'll be taking a bit of a journey here together, starting with what passive cooling really is and how it works, then looking at findings from both lab and field experiments, and finally diving into insights from training, scaling efforts, and lessons learned along the way. If you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the chat box, as we'll be doing a Q&A at the end. And I hope you enjoy the session. So, perhaps to start us off, could you briefly explain to us what passive cooling is and outline the main types of technologies used?
Sure. So passive cooling in general is a term that describes the use of natural physical processes such as evaporation, but also radiation and air convection to remove heat, so to cool without really the use of electricity or active mechanical components. And this is a technology that these technologies have been used for thousands of years. For me, the most impressive application of it are the so-called wind catchers in Persia. And in general, the advantages of passive cooling in general is that it's usually low cost, low maintenance, and it can therefore be used to short-term store food in a chilled manner. Yeah.
And could you perhaps expand on how passive cooling fits within the broader cooling landscape? Like, what is its role alongside active or mechanical systems?
Yeah. So, in my view, the main role of the passive cooling, and especially since we will be mainly talking about evaporative cooling and clay pots, this is a technology that bridges the gap between no cooling at all and an active cooling application. Because, as I said, as it is low cost and as it is easy to implement, it can be immediately used to reduce post-harvest losses and therefore have an effect with very little effort. Yeah, and what else I want to say is that I see a big potential in having, if these passive cooling and evaporative cooling solutions are, once they are implemented in the supply chain, they serve as a sort of or they serve as to also give kind of a cold chain behavior that can be implemented in the supply chains that could later be also upgraded to active cooling solutions when they are available, because they will need more infrastructure and so on. I don't know if Eric, you also see this potential there, but yeah. So that is all. That is a bit where I would put the passive cooling.
Yeah, definitely. I think, in a lot of cases it can be seen as a bridge, and in others, I think you can see passive active cooling, clay pot coolers remaining even if you have electrification and access to refrigeration, because it is so low cost. We've seen people in Mali that have refrigerators use evaporative coolers for their fruits and vegetables, then freeing up the refrigerator for other higher value things that need lower temperatures.
You mentioned evaporative cooling and clay pot coolers, Jörg. Perhaps you can dive into a bit what it actually looks like, how it works, and what factors affect its effectiveness for people who have never seen it before.
Yeah, so I can start with it, and then I will give the word to Eric, because he's really the specialist. I applied it, as I said, last year there in Guinea-Bissau. And so the main idea is there is an inner clay pot and an outer clay pot, and the in-between is filled with sand. And this sand is then watered, and the produce is put inside the inner clay pot, and then it is covered with a wet cloth. And what happens physically is that the water evaporates, and for this evaporation it needs energy, and this energy it takes from the surrounding. So inside of the clay pot, the temperature goes down, and that is also what I find very important, that the humidity goes up. And many fruits and vegetables like conditions that are to store that are high humidity and lower temperature. So this is a really simple and effective way to cool the produce, but it requires some ambient conditions. Usually high, it is used in high hot climates with low relative humidity. But as I said, Eric can go there a bit deeper, I think, in detail, showing also how different types of these clay pot coolers can be built.
Yeah, please do. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that great explanation. I don't need to add to that the physics you described perfectly. One thing that's really wonderful about these is how loose the design constraints are. So you don't have to follow a really exact script. You don't have to say, oh, this is 40 centimeters inner diameter and 45 centimeters outer diameter. I think one of the key insights we had back around 2017, 2018, when researching these, even before developing the training program, was that you can use a wide variety of different geometries. The main objective is to have as much surface area available as possible for the evaporation of water. This is what drives the cooling rate. Let's say if you had a plastic dish that came up 90% of the way, you won't have evaporation on that surface. But as you can see here, there's 3 different design variations that we promote as part of the training program. The clay pot and pot is the Zier pot. That's the one that's typically first thought of when people think of clay pot coolers. Folks in northern Nigeria have been selling these for a little bit. The clay pot and dish is just a variant, and the clay pot and you can do a clay dish, or you can do a plastic dish. The temperature drop is slightly less for the pot and dish designs, but it's not so much lower that it affects the shelf life. We still see really good shelf life extensions with all these different designs. And the really important part of why the pot and dish designs is that these designs these materials can be found without customization. So when you're looking at a clay pot and pot design, you need 2 concentric cylinders that fit inside each other. Most traditional pots in West Africa come up to a smaller neck, as you see on the right, the 2 images on the right. So having that versatility to be able to grab a plastic dish that you might already have in your home and a clay pot you can easily find at the market makes it much easier to make and lowers the cost. These devices can cost anywhere between $2 and $15, depending on the size and depending on the local available materials.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, no, go ahead. I didn't want to interrupt you.
Yeah, if you go to the slide with the assembly, I can just walk through that real quick.
Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. The assembly is super quick. This will be on the recording. I'm not going to go through everything in detail, but basically you put sand in the bottom, put the inner pot in, and this is the same for the pot and pot versus pot and dish designs. Basically fill it with sand all the way around, add water, that's what creates the evaporation. Put your fruits and vegetables inside. And then the other key is having a wet sack on the cover. This provides an extra surface for evaporation and also prevents heat from going in as opposed to if it was open.
Great, thank you. I wish we had more time to look at it in more detail, but perhaps in the interest of time, it would be interesting to dig in. Jörg, from your lab work, what kind of impact have you seen passive cooling have on actually reducing post-harvest losses? And if you could give us a sense of how much shelf life extension or quality improvement passive cooling can achieve in practice, that would be very interesting.
So what we see here is experiments in the field, not the lab, and that is Muhammadu is the expert there. But what I did in the lab was testing these different evaporative cooling technologies. So one was the clay pot, but also technologies that use charcoal instead of the sand to evaporate the water. And we compared that with different small-scale active cooling technology. So basically domestic fridges and these thermoelectric boxes that you might know that also cool, because we wanted to see how the differences are between these technologies and how they perform. Now, in a lab environment, because we tested that on tomato, we didn't see that much of a difference at the beginning, because tomatoes don't need so low temperatures. And but what I can say from these experiments as a very practical takeaway that I now have in my kitchen, I have a clay pot, a small one, where I put the tomatoes because they last longer for me here in in these clay pots compared to the fridge, because fridges often go have too low temperatures for this specific type of crop there. So it is even better. So these were the lab experiments, but what we did them for was to also compare them then with the field experiments. And what we see here was from the very first field trip, and we just took some crops, for example, the eggplants we see here, and we put some in the clay pot and some outside, and we just had them for a week or for the 8 days and just compared them side by side. And that was very, very interesting because it's a very visual thing to see how well these clay pots are working. And we even had it, just to add this detail, we had it in the on the back of the truck, so it was a really harsh environment and they worked perfectly. But now I'm curious. I know that Eric also has done a lot of experiments. If that goes together with what you have seen in your evaluations.
Yeah, absolutely. That's wonderful to hear about having in the back of a truck. That's super interesting and very encouraging. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, we've done a bunch of lab experiments as well as field experiments. We've done some really rigorous lab experiments with leafy greens where we've tested 15 different design variations, and with multiple different types of leafy greens, and pretty consistently saw roughly 1 to 2 days of before they spoil in ambient conditions. We're just putting the leafy greens in a open basket. And then when you put it in the clay pot cooler, you get up to 4 to 6 days. And we'll talk later about how that impacts a user's life and what benefits that provides. So leafy greens do fantastic. This is in large part because they're basically big flat sheets that are perfect for evaporating water quickly, high surface to volume ratio. And so as George mentioned earlier on, it's not just the lowering of the temperature, it's the raising of the humidity to prevent that dehydration. It's a really important part of the efficacy of the clay pot cooler. But we also see great things with eggplants, carrots, tomatoes. In this image here, you can see a host of leafy greens. Those are African eggplant, the green spheres there, and then the carrots. So on the left, you can see after 3 days, this was actually one of our training of trainer sessions in Niamey, Niger. And we did this as a demonstration. Our training and trainer sessions are about 4 days long. So we put them in on the first day, and then 3 days later at the end, the participants get to see this stark difference. The leafy greens we show the next morning after the first day, which is great. So you can see this huge difference. I think this picture speaks for itself. And we've got loads of data. I'm sure Jorg and Mohammed have some data as well on the actual extension. So we've seen cucumbers go from 2 days to 14 days. One quick caveat is that people will ask me, as an engineer, I have a little bit of a hard time of answering the question of how long does clay pot coolers extend vegetables broadly. It depends on the vegetable. Even within tomatoes, it depends on the variety. It certainly depends on when it was harvested. And it, of course, depends on the ambient conditions. So the hotter and drier it is, the faster all these things are going to spoil. So in 30 Celsius, or say 35 Celsius, 30% humidity, most of these fruits and vegetables are spoiling super quickly. If you're in more mild temperatures, you're still getting an extension from clay pot coolers, but the starting point's not going to be so harsh. Your leafy green might last 4 days already if you're at 25 Celsius and 50% humidity. So there's always some caveats there. So everything we do, we like to do it with a control. We have the vegetables side by side, picked at the same time, one in a crate, one in a clay pot cooler. I think that's the standard practice we all use. But
Yeah, since Mohammed also did a couple of field experiments, I wanted to give him a chance here to mention what his view was, how the lab results, for example, compared with the real world field conditions, and if he has noticed any other factors apart from the ones that you've already mentioned that contributed to these differences and the efficacy of passive coolers. Mohammadi, if you have any thoughts, feel free to jump in.
Yeah, thank you. So as a specialist just explained here, we have George and Eric. So regarding the experiment we conducted here in Guinea-Bissau, it's also depend on the climate condition of the zone, and we did 2 experiments in the capital Bissau, which is much more cooler in terms of comparison between the 2 zones, and we tried to do another one in Bafata, which is the zone that you can find in terms of climate condition is hotter. So this is also can give you a bit of understanding of how long this produce can be stored. What we find out that in the Buff region, especially in the hotter side, which is Bafata, we have a result which is more than 50, can last more than 50%. So that was impressive, especially for vendors that don't have access to active cooling, but they can use those clay pot as alternative in order to improve to increase the life shelf of their produce. So mostly the climate conditions play also the role here in terms of cooling, passive cooling activities and technology.
Yeah, it's also incredible to see the difference in the pictures and knowing that it's such a simple technology and that there's only a few days difference between them. So thank you so much for expanding on that. I wanted to take a moment also to ask the audience if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them down below, and we'll have a Q&A at the end of the session, so we'll answer all your questions, or as many as we can then. So now we talked about what passive cooling is, how these systems look like and work, and some results from testing these. I guess the next step is training people how to use them and scaling them in practice. And I know Eric has a lot of experience in that. I know you've led trainings and capacity building efforts around passive cooling through CoolVeg. So I wanted to ask you, what are the key challenges and aspects of training and capacity building that you found are important for success?
Yeah, definitely. So I think just the quick kind of bullet point on the most important things. When transmitting information like this, having a trusted information network is really critical. So I'll give an example. So when we were developing our training program, we were working with a clay potter named Khadija Nyeta, and some agricultural extension agents. And we originally thought, let's train clay potters to sell these. Now, Kadidi is a clay potter, and she had originally been introduced to clay pot coolers through our research project. And then she'd been using them for 3 years while we were also doing design iterations. And we started co-designing this training program. She said, we have to train people in the community to build trust in this. She said, people tell me, Kadidi, your mother's a clay potter, your sister's a clay potter, your daughter's a clay potter. You guys think clay pots are good for everything. She didn't have the credibility on her own to sell this thing. So when we came in with agricultural extension agents, we trained a combination of clay potters, vendors, farmers, and households who consume vegetables. Everybody sees each other get excited about the technology. Most importantly, the clay potters see the households get excited about the technology. The households now have this credibility from the ag extension agents who are already known in the community, live in the community in most cases, and are trusted to share agricultural best practices. So bringing this together where we generate both supply and demand through a trusted information network, I think is the number one key to the success of the training program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and also just to show these slides.
Yeah.
I wonder, beyond just reducing post-harvest losses, what kinds of feedback have you heard from users then who did start using the systems about how these solutions have impacted their day-to-day livelihoods in terms of, for example, income or food security or anything else?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll give a little more detail on the structure of the training program so that for the audience. And so we use a cascade training program structure or a training of trainers structure. We develop a cohort of trainers and then through these 4-day workshops. And those trainers in the communities, usually rural off-grid communities, and then conduct training sessions with 20, 25 people at a time. And all these training sessions involve hands-on component. So in the trainers workshop, these folks obviously learn to build these things. They actually go and practice the training as part of the TOT workshop. And when they go into the community, the training sessions can take anywhere between half a day to a full day. There's a lot of flexibility in how the trainers can structure this as they see fit. They hit on a bunch of key points, but one of them really is making sure that the participants are able to construct one of these on their own, see how they function, go through the best practices. That's what empowers people to really have the confidence to not only make it for themselves, but to share with other people. So our training programs in Mali, Niger, in total, we've trained over 8,000 people. And the adoption rate of this is 88%. So 88% of the people who attend the training program then go on to make and use these clay pot coolers, which I think is a fantastically high number. So that's great. And then among those, but what really matters is how does this affect their lives, not just are they doing what we're proposing. So basically asking these folks, do you eat many more vegetables, the same amount, less vegetables, much less vegetables? 85% of the people who are using the clay pot cooler said they ate some more vegetables or many more vegetables. Also, there's a big component here of value of for households. People are traveling to the market sometimes every day. One of the first times I started basically doing an ad hoc training was in Uganda, and a woman was going to the market every day to buy leafy greens. And right there, we were able to explain to her, my colleague and I, about how to make a clay pot cooler. She had a clay pot in her house already. She had a plastic dish, and she had a bed sheet. So in 13 minutes, she was able to assemble a clay pot cooler without leaving her house or spending a dime. And then she had a clay pot cooler that now allows her to store vegetables, the leafy greens in particular, for up to 4 to 6 days. So instead of going to the market every day, she can now go 2 to 3 days a week. This is huge. That's an anecdote. Across so 88% of the people in Mali, Niger that took the training and made a clay pot cooler, so they spent less time traveling to the market. And then among those folks, they said they saved an average of 74 minutes per week. This is pretty great. An extra hour a day, hour a week. Who doesn't want that? Especially for women and girls who are burdened with a lot of other daily tasks and have full days. On the food waste side, we have 95% of the folks who use clay pot coolers report having less food waste. We don't have quantitative information of how much food waste is averted or how much more vegetables people eat. It's a little more resource intensive from an M&E perspective. We have a lot of ambition to get that quantified. So that's on the side of the impacts the household has. But what's really exciting to me, as an engineer, I really enjoy studying the design iterations. We've seen how flexible they are and how well they work, but the potential for scale is massive here. So the Sahel region, basically south of the Sahara Desert, north of where the more tropical climates, has a total of 270 million people, and 180 million of those people are living in off-grid rural areas. That's a huge potential market for this. And beyond just the 88% adoption rate, huge amounts of secondary dissemination of this, people sharing information with their community members, clay potters going on to sell clay pots to people who didn't attend the trainings. So roughly we have a 10x amplification of, for everyone who attends a training, they share information with another 10 people. And a significant number of those people, 75% of the people who shared information said they actually solved using the clay pot cooler within the next few months. So looking at all that, training 8,000 people and having over 80,000 people now have information about this, we're estimating that we have between 20,000 and 50,000 households are now using clay pot coolers. And this is coming from only a total of a little over 300 training sessions. So the potential for scale here is huge. And also the cost effectiveness is extremely, extremely low. We estimate you can get between $1 and $2 per person impacted through a program at scale.
That's incredible, yeah. I was wondering, for both of you, Eric and Mohammed, since you both have worked also in the area of training and capacity building, you mentioned that it's quite easy for them to actually implement these systems, but I was wondering whether you have made the experience that there have been some challenges for people to implement this, and if so, what are the biggest challenges for communities in adopting these technologies? Perhaps it's cost or maintenance or something else, behavioral, who knows? If you could dig in a bit into that, that would be very interesting. So,
how about you?
Yeah.
Okay, from our experience, I think it's also again it depends on the region, and for example, in our here in the East region, let's say mostly the projects focus Bafata and Gabu. One of the challenges is the availability of the technology in terms of seasonalities. So they was interested in the technology because this is something that they have been using for long, but not for passive cooling, let's say for crops specifically, but it's for cooling waters and etc. So it was very welcome to them, especially seeing the numbers that it works and it can extend the shelf life. So one of the challenges also was, the main challenges first is the availability for that specific region for the technology, how they have access to it. So the main challenges was the access in that sense. And the second challenge mostly was to understand, because you have to know the people that you are dealing with, is to understand the deeper the concept, so which is required more time in terms of explaining the technologies, the concepts behind the cooling aspects, especially the passive cooling. So maybe Eric, if you can also highlight from your side what in terms of the understanding the concept and which approach did you use in order to fill that gap, considering the local community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of everything you mentioned is in line with our experience. I think just highlighting sometimes there is issues with finding locally available materials. Usually we can find things that work. Sometimes they don't quite look the same, and it takes folks from the experts from our colleagues in West Africa who have been making these or on the ground running these training sessions to get in and try to find the right design variations that still meet the criteria. So it might just be, a pot that looks a little bit different, has a taller neck, but like that's okay, and we can fit that in. I've had issues in Kenya where the clay pots are mostly available in the west where it's humid, and then where it's dry in the north and the east, there's not clay pots available. So we've been kind of stuck there. What's great about West Africa is that some type of clay pots are available pretty much everywhere. The other is, like you mentioned, the climate. We try to be really careful about not trying to promote this technology in humid regions. We don't want to waste people's time, and we don't want to damage the reputation of the technology. So if you try to use this, and also we don't do our training sessions in the rainy season. So I'd say Mali, Niger, the rainy season is June, July, and August. It's not that much of the year. We make sure to do the training session, try not even do it in May if we can. Just try to do it in October, December, or even better in January, where it's the hottest time of the year in those regions. So just trying to protect the reputation and not waste people's time. You don't want people starting this off and you're going home and you maybe a month after the training session, now it's humid out. And they're like, this doesn't work. And they never think of it again. So what do we,
Yeah, for sure. Maybe, thank you, Eric and Mohammed.
Yeah, just to add on top of that, also one of the challenges also was exactly the rain season. Here in Guinea-Bissau as well, we have around 6 months of rain season. So you can't, let's say, organize training, for example, and how do you, to access the sand and all those materials. In some regions you have more materials in that region, the other regions you don't find them at all, or you have less materials in that sense. So this is also rain season, of course, is a big challenge in terms of implementing this technology.
We talked now about the challenges communities face in adopting this technology. What would you say are the biggest barriers still holding back scaling of the technology? They might be the same, they might not. I just wanted to check what your thoughts were on that. Maybe Eric, you can start.
Yeah, for sure. I think once you've identified regions, and again, there's 160 million, 180 million people in the Sahel that I think are well suited from a climate perspective, from a need perspective, and you've identified the materials which are for the most part widely available. The next big step is how do you gather the resources and the network to bring a training program to scale? So obviously funding is needed to launch these kind of things, but the way to make it cost effective is use, again, trusted information dissemination networks. So this could be ag extension, this could be farmer producer cooperatives. One that I'm really excited about is working with schools. A lot of schools in West Africa have either school gardens, where they're doing demonstrations of gardens, or school feeding programs where local produce is brought in by the government and then sold to the school and then fed to the children. So it's a double whammy of getting, supporting local agriculture as well as getting kids nutritious food. So once you have that already going on, it's like a no-brainer to get clay pots into those schools, not only just to preserve the vegetables as they'll be able to do, for that program, giving them the benefits of the clay pot cooler, but now you have these things on demonstration in the schools. So my dream is to train every 4th grader and 8th grader just for one day. Do that for 4 years. Now we've got a cohort of 8 years of students all across the country who know about this, and then you're basically done, right? You supplement that with some training of adults on the ag extension side, or health clinics, women's cooperative. There's so many different channels that have potential for this. We really want to see the ones that have the biggest reach and the most cost effectiveness. When it comes to the training program, the 2 biggest costs of the training program are transportation of the trainer to get to the location and providing lunch for the participants. It's generally something that we want to do to encourage people to come, and so they're not, trying to learn while hungry. So when you think of that as transportation, if we get it in the schools, now you've got teachers are already there. Maybe pay them an extra little stipend for doing a couple of trainings to incentivize them, and the lunches are already there. It's the school feeding program, so the cost plummets. So we can really see a huge potential for scale there. So working with those institutional actors. And really the ultimate payer for this, it's one thing to have philanthropy and grants to get our work going to initiate this, but if the governments take ownership of it, they're running the program on their own. They see the value. They can see that for less than $1 per person, per student trained, they can do this. If we can demonstrate this at a little larger scale and get a little more monitoring evaluation, show the impact, show the spread within the communities, not just the trainees, and quantify that, I think this could really take off and reach millions of people pretty quickly.
It's very interesting what you mentioned about the school feeding programs. I hadn't heard about that before. I was wondering if you're aware of any other business models or partnership approaches that seem to work best for scaling. That would be interesting. Also, I don't know, Jörg, Madhu, if you have anything to add there, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I would maybe have a question just about Eric, what you feel about this. I mean, there is now, of course, schools. I like this idea a lot. I think this has a huge potential, but there is more and more digitalization in the sense of that there are smartphones in some sense or being available. How would you say is the potential of sharing videos, assembling videos, or showcasing the potential of these clay pots using these channels? Or would you say it's better to go person to person or in schools to have the trust build up? Because I mean, the internet it's a huge thing, and the information basically is there, but it's somehow not adapted. So what is your feeling about this going via videos, internet approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's huge potential for that. Thanks for bringing it up. In general, I see it as a supplement, a really powerful supplement. I wouldn't want to jump to an all digital campaign. That can be done, but the two reasons I would say that it can work as a really strong supplement, and I'm not as enthusiastic about digital alone. One is we found the hands-on component as being super critical for building that capacity and confidence within the community. But once you've got somebody in the community, let's say we train 25 people in a village with a population of 3,000 people. Somebody knows somebody who's attended the training. Mm-hmm. They come across on WhatsApp, on YouTube, on Facebook, a simple video. We've got some videos under a minute doing the assembly, videos explaining under a minute, explaining the benefits and the context for these things. And if they can come across those type of things, we've also been working on a WhatsApp chatbot to allow people to interactively kind of move through and see different stages, and including videos as well as stills. Sorry. So I think there's huge potential there. Like as you said, smartphone adoption rates, I think last I looked were in the 10 to 20% in places like Mali and Niger, probably higher in other parts of West Africa, but that number is only going up. We know that. And I think the data says that about 100% of people who have a smartphone are using either Facebook or WhatsApp or both. So that network's there. When you think about 10%, that might sound low, but if you think about it's usually 10% like within a given village. It's not like no one in a given village has a smartphone. So you don't have to have your own smartphone, someone you can show somebody. So I think there's a lot of potential that way. And I think we're still sussing out exactly how well that can perform. And I think in our next project, if we can get something that's large enough to go with schools, ag stations combined, bringing in the digital piece is a no-brainer. And the other one is rural radio. There's a lot of things where people listen to radio programs, and these are very inexpensive, and they're actually usually listened to on the phone and not radios. You call in some number and you hear the radio program. So a lot of potential for these supplemental things. And we get to that point of how do we reach? My real dream is to make all 270 million people across the Sahel aware of this. They're not all going to adopt it, but if they're all aware of it, we're going to get tens of millions of people using it.
Yeah. So it's about somehow planting seeds in the village, and as soon as that, okay. Muhammadu, sorry.
Yeah, just to share also one of the approach that we use here is to take advantage of already existing communities, associations, or NGOs. So the first approach is to train a specific community representative. So as we worked with in coordination with other NGOs that are working the same project. So each representative of each community is representing a farmers club. And this, of course, will use the knowledge in order to replicate the knowledge through this farmers club, which means you have more than 95 farmers clubs that representative that were trained, and then they will replicate the knowledge. And within each community, this also can replicate the knowledge. I think this is also approach where people don't have access to digital tools, people don't have access to radios. They can also use these already existing rural networks. And another thing just to share as an experience is that after the first training we conducted is those young people coming from different regions, they already start say, hey, why not to, let's say, to start our own business with this, because this is very new for us. And this was the first time they're hearing about clay pots and using clay pot for passive cooling. And they have been using it for a long period, but they didn't know that you can use it for storing produce. And that's also another, you can see people coming from different regions, from east, south, are coming together to see this as a business opportunity and to start disseminating it within the country. Thank you.
Thank you so much, all, for the super interesting insights. I feel like we could continue this conversation a lot longer, but I also want to make sure to leave some time for the Q&A. And we've already had a lot of questions actually rolling in. So if that's okay for you, I'll move straight to the Q&A, and we can start looking at some of the questions that the participants had. So one of the first ones goes like this. From my experience, it is difficult to convince farmers or even traders to adopt this technology despite the enormous benefits. In your view, how can we overcome this? How do we present the design and passive coolers in a way that will be appealing to consumers? So whoever wants to take this, please feel free.
I mean, I can just maybe start with an anecdote from that field trip where we showed it. And my feeling was, and I'm curious what Muhammad was saying, and of course Eric, was that once you got somebody to have interest in it because they saw really, okay, this works good, then this got the attraction from other people seeing that it's very easy to use, and they adapt it quickly, and then they got interested in, okay, how does it work, and can you show me this as well? So I have the feeling it's really this planting the seeds of interest is a very powerful thing, but that is only from what we saw when we were discussing with people there.
Eric, maybe you can add also on your experience from other contexts.
Yeah. The question was specific about farmers, and one key part here is that the clay pot coolers have limited capacity. The capacity of a clay pot cooler is the capacity of the largest pot you can buy that can fit inside another thing. And people ask me all the time, what about farmers? What about bigger stuff? There's other options like brick evaporative cooling chambers that work through the same basic principles. You have passive evaporative cooling. There's charcoal cooling chambers that sprinkles water over charcoal to passively evaporate. When you get to a room-sized passive evaporative cooler, it doesn't really make sense because the surface to volume ratio is too low, and you don't get enough cooling power for the amount of vegetables stored inside. But if you go up to brick cooling chambers, you still get good, total temperature down and reasonable cooling rates. The problem with brick cooling chambers is they're a little clunkier to construct, and also sometimes the bricks grow legs and walk away and build a house. You know what I mean? But coming back to the clay pot cooler side, I think the key is, and not just for this piece on the size, is making sure people understand the limitations. And if you have more crops that will fit in several clay pot coolers, doesn't make sense. That is what it is, and it's probably not the right solution for you. But on the household level, for vendors, for farmers who are harvesting, maybe 20, 50 kilograms of vegetables per day, or only need to store that at a time, it's usually a great fit, and we don't see issues with adoption. But again, just across the board, clay pot coolers can be hugely impactful for the right fit. But if you have larger volumes, if you're in the wrong climate, if you can't find the materials, if you're not you don't have the right vegetables, like if you're only looking at red onions or something, or garlic that can get spoiled, you don't want to store those. So really trying to make sure, we always try to make sure to focus where this is really a home run. And so for some farmers, it might not be a fit.
Great, thanks, Eric. And you actually did a great segue to the next question, which is on charcoal cooling blankets. The question is, have you done any research on the use of charcoal for passive cooling? If yes, is it not more functional with larger capacity than the use of clay pots? Jörg, I know some of your research based on charcoal blankets, so please feel free to take this one.
It's true. It's true. We tested also this. So colleagues did that before. I also tested it in the lab for the tomato case, and it's like the performance is in the same range as the clay pots. It's just way more flexible, but especially or the feedback I got when I introduced it at the very beginning was with the charcoal you have some conflicting interest, because at some point you might use the charcoal. It's a bit like the bricks that grow legs, as Eric just said. So the feedback we got was that the charcoal at some points just is then used to make a fire, and then basically it's gone. But for the question, it's true that you can have bigger volumes, or let's say it can be used more flexible, but also there the volume to surface ratio is an issue. So it has more degrees of freedom, but it also has to be the right fit for a certain application. But of course, the principle is the same. The condition it requires are also very similar, and it is another nice technology. What I'm there with the blankets, I would be very interested in if there would be some research in the future to use these blankets also, because they're so much more flexible. For example, if produce is transported and already it is already in some kind of crate, and you can use these blankets just to cover them and then have a cooling effect even when you're transporting them, which is a bit harder if you use clay pots because they can break, especially on bumpy roads. So I think it goes in the very similar direction. It's just way more flexible, which can be an advantage there.
Yeah, real quick, I just want to echo that. I think that you hit it on the head, that the flexibility. I think the work you guys have done where you can make it right around the crate, if people are already using crates to drop that blanket on, is wonderful. And definitely the fragility. I mean, we've had issues sometimes even getting the clay pots, if we're putting them in one place and getting them to another location, you can have breakage there. So with the clay pots, you want to have it locally available where you're not transporting this heavy, fragile thing. And with the charcoal blankets, you have a lot more flexibility.
Yeah, there was sorry, did I interrupt someone? No? Okay. There was one person who was a bit concerned also for both clay pot coolers and charcoal blankets. What is the lowest achievable temperature with them? Because they were aware that too low a temperature is also not good for some vegetables. So if you have any data on that, feel free to jump in.
Yep. So the lowest temperature achievable, we get a little sciencey here, is the wet bulb temperature. So this is also kind of similar to the dew point, but not exactly. So basically, you have the higher the temperature, the higher the humidity, the greater temperature drop you're going to get. But as you go down, let's say you're going to 25 Celsius and low humidity, maybe you can get to 17, 16 Celsius. So you're really not going to get in a situation where, for any vegetables, where you're going to be cooling them down to get them from a reasonably warm ambient temperature down to something that's too cool. So that's rarely going to be an issue. Usually I hear the opposite question of people are saying, this doesn't get cold enough. And then I end up having a conversation about, well, look at the shelf life results. That's what really matters. And so as an engineer, I really like the optimization and thinking of these things, but I've had to break that engineer and science mindset from a design perspective and say, we want to understand what geometries give what cooling rates and what cooling rates and final temperatures and what humidities. But what we really need to focus on is the shelf life. And then what we really need to focus on beyond that is the impact on people. So looking again, to me, it's much more valuable to have a side-by-side comparison of the local vegetables in the local clay pot cooler than it is to put sensors on clay pot coolers and measure the temperature humidity, which I've done like 1,000 times. But you want to move towards the thing that's more practical for people. So I hope that answers a little bit of the, one of those kind of context matters things. But yeah.
Yeah, and there's thank you, Eric. There's actually a question that links super nicely to that. Namely, as you mentioned, it's important to look at the shelf life, but how do we show people this? And one person mentioned a really good way to do this, as you also mentioned, is using sensors. However, this person said most IoT sensors are expensive and difficult for smallholders and petty traders in this region to adopt. In your view, how can this challenge be addressed? So if you want to add to that.
Yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of work with IoT sensors, both for our clay pot cooler work, as well as we do some work with forced air evaporative cooling chambers to address that farmer's need. I won't get into the details of that, but there's on CoolVeg's website, you can check that out. IoT sensors, I think, are really critical in the early stages of refining a technology to make sure you understand the physics of what's going on. But you want to be moving away from that. I mean, an IoT sensor costs as much as 5 clay pot coolers, usually at best. So, it's really a research tool. And I don't think that we need to have, especially on something as low cost as clay pot coolers, we don't need to have sensors on them for the users to believe that it's getting cold. They can use their hands, and more importantly, they can see the vegetables after 3, 4, 5 days.
All right.
Maybe Muhammadu, because we were also, we always had, for that reason, because we were testing, so we had the sensors in place. But Muhammadu, what is your, because I remember that we also shared very simple sensors, so not IoT very connected sensors, but the simplest still digital sensors for temperature and humidity we could get. And what was your feeling? Were they necessary? Would you say that they were necessary, or is it more as Eric says?
No, indeed, it was necessary. For example, one of the things is to understand and to read what is happening inside the clay pots. So if you are able to see what is happening, because just can
Oh, apologies. I think
and say, hey, this humidity can go theoretically, but not showing them. And hello.
yes, you're back, Mohammed. Sorry if you
So,
could repeat that.
so it was interesting, and even many people was already saying, "Hey, leave it to me, leave it with us," because it can give them already idea what is happening inside. But one thing that I would like to mention here also we use is not only the training in passive cooling itself, but also the post-harvest management. So how from post-harvest to storing, how you should manage the product to be produced before putting them inside of the clay pot. I think this is also a very important aspect, and it was very, very interactive and very interesting from the farmers as well. They
Mohammed, we lost you again.
I'll just add on that is that I'm really glad he brought up the point of overall understanding of post-harvest management. About the first quarter to maybe even a third of the training, a typical training program, is about the basics of why stored vegetables, the difference between climacteric and non-climacteric, what are the right storage ranges. And so people have that understanding of, oh yeah, the leafy greens are these sheets that evaporate water and these kind of things. So having that a part of there so people understand the why that this technology, now that you get a cooler temperature, now that you get a humid temperature, they have context of why that helps.
All right, great. I think
Maybe I can add
Hello?
one more thing, or Muhammadu is back.
yeah, Mohammed is back.
I don't know where you guys lost me, but I was just trying to say that it is very important as well to train people on the post-harvest management, on how especially to treat the crops before putting them inside, and also after putting them inside, how do you control them, because some may have a problem, and if you mix them together, it can impact orders that are and this can affect the whole system.
It's a very good point, Mohammed. Yes, it's not just about the clay pot coolers, but also the whole the whole ecosystem that needs to be a part of the training sessions, as also Eric mentioned. So thank you so much for bringing that up. I might just take one last question, and then we can wrap up the session to make sure we end on time. There was one question on how or to what extent these passive cooling techniques are aligned with global certification standards like Global GAP, or aligned with the expectations of the formal retail sector. Now, I think it's important here to note that there's a lot of different passive cooling techniques, and each have different use cases. But is there anyone who would like to add something to that, or to respond to that question?
So we haven't gotten into this. I think it's a great question. There's certainly a lot of opportunities with cooling technologies overall, whether it's a certification of the energy efficiency, even potential carbon credits can be thought of. We haven't delved into that. When it comes to something this small, and the impact of one, basically, I get a little uneasy about trying to say, if I'm going to try to assign this person are they averting refrigeration? Are they averting food spoilage? How do you appropriately gather that data to put together a package that says this carbon credit is worth that? Personally, I don't want to step into that realm until we have, if we get data that can be really standardized for that and try to bring carbon credits into it. And then also, like, because this is a clay pot cooler, it's not an electric appliance. I'm not sure if here in the US we call it LEED certification. I'm not that up on those. I'm not sure if that would be kind of appropriate. It's not the right word, but it wouldn't really. These devices might not fit in with those certifications, but I could be wrong. But I think when you get to the larger vapor compression refrigerator, active cooling type things, that's where those type of certifications I think have a lot of value.
Muhammadu, let me know if you have anything else to add to that. Otherwise, I would slowly start to wrap up the session. No? Okay, well, thank you so much to... Oh, yeah, Muhammadu?
No, thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much to everyone who joined the session, and our speakers, of course, for making the time to explain to us their experience and provide some insights on this very important topic. For everyone who joined the session, don't forget that you can continue your agri-cooling journey with the URVCCA onboarding kit, which is packed with tools, videos, and step-by-step guidance for implementing cooling solutions. You can scan the QR code on the screen to get started. And to stay updated on your VCCA, please subscribe to the base newsletter. The QR code is now also, or should be on the screen. I think I'm having some technical difficulties. We'll make sure to send you that link also later on. Now that the session is complete, please make sure to return to the main event page using the link you received in your inbox when you registered under the subject line Global URVCCA Summit. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for moderating.
Thanks, you. Thank you.